Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you will happen to be today, and happy closing. I know everyone is very excited about that. My name is Isaiah Thomas. I use the He series, and I'm chair-elect for the Small College and University Network. And I also serve as Associate Dean of Students and Director of Residential Education, Housing Services, and Student Conduct at Occidental College. I'm excited to have you here for today's webinar. For those of you new to ACUHO-I, we are the Association of College and University Housing Officers International, committed to advancing the campus housing and residence life. This free webinar series is part of the association's ongoing effort to spotlight timely topics and amplify voices from across our profession. Our panel today features four wonderful leaders from small schools who will share how they have navigated campus crises while centering care for themselves, their staff, and their broader communities. Before we begin, a quick note. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the ACUHO-I YouTube channel after the webinar. For our program, we'll start with moderated questions for about 40 minutes, followed by audience Q&A. We'll also wrap up with a few announcements from ACUHO-I about exciting upcoming opportunities. Now it's my pleasure to pass it to our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with the current chair of the Small College and University Network, Luis Inoa.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending where you're at. My name is Luis Jimenez Hinoa. I'm the Associate Dean of the College for Student Living and Wellness at Vassar College, a small school in the Hudson Valley of New York. And my role kind of takes on the pieces on the residential life side of things, in addition to the components in wellness, counseling, health service, case management, and so on. Yeah, pleasure to be with y'all on here today.
I'm going to now pass it to Terrence Turner to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Terrence Turner. I go by Turner. I currently serve as the Director of Residential Life at Vassar College, right here in Towson, Maryland, little north of downtown Baltimore. It's good to be with you all today.
Thank you, Turner. Edwin Hamada.
Hello, everybody. My name is Edwin Amada. I am the Associate Vice President for Student Life here at Colorado College. We had a nice snowstorm, so it is very wintry, like Turner's background.
And finally, Alexander.
Hello, my name is Alexander Doyle. I am the Director of Residence Life at Southwest Michigan College, located in Dowagiac, Michigan. We are on the border of Michigan and Indiana.
Thank you all so much for your introductions and for everybody for joining us. So with that, we're going to jump right in with our first question. So panelists, when did you first experience or lead through a campus crisis? And what did you learn about yourself and your leadership style?
I can kick things off here with this one. So at my previous institution was in South Cleveland, Ohio. It was Notre Dame College, and the school closed last year. And we led through a crisis, learning that the school would close. So going through our students, our staff members, our faculty, it was a very troublesome time. It was very disconcerting, and just learning how to navigate that for our residents slash students. Because at the end of the day, we're here to make sure that they are provided with the best education tools and resources there are. But learning that our school will close at the end of the school year, we weren't able to do that anymore. So now the students, we pulled the students inside of a big assembly room, and our president at the time informed the students about that. So there was the news station that was outside of the building. Students were leaving crying. They were trying to figure out what their future was. And now I had to realize my role as being a director of Resident Life there, realizing how are we going to make this transparent for our residents and to make sure that they are going to be continuing their education at neighboring schools. So leading that through the crisis was my first major time, and learning about myself that this is really where I want to be at in residence life in that field in higher education, helping students navigate their transition either at this current school or the next school. Um, and the thing about residence life is that when students live on campus, we're here to make sure that they leave better than how they came. So realizing that the tools that they have at their previous institution, that they're going to take that to their next institution and continue their success elsewhere.
I could jump in. I think, when I think about some of the crises that I've dealt with, the one thing about learning about yourself, I mean, sometimes there's your cultural upbringing. For me, I was the youngest in a Japanese family, so I had no opinion, or I couldn't share my opinion about that. And so I think a lot of that, you bring your personality into your leadership style, or you should, or else you're going to continually sort of battle back and forth. But for me, the one thing that I learned with that is that, when it comes time, I mean, you need to step up. When you're leading a situation, you can't be the baby of the family that has no opinion because everybody's looking at you to have that opinion. So for me, I know that that's something that I've learned over the decades as I sort of refine my leadership style is how do I stay authentic to myself as a leader, but understand a situation as a crisis. There needs to be few leaders, but many followers. And so you might not necessarily be the leader, even if you're the director in that situation, or you might be the leader in that situation because you're dealing with maybe you're the staff that are there are not quite as experienced and they're looking at you. So but I think the challenge that I've seen over the years is when everybody thinks that they're leaders and then it is just a battle of who's in charge. And in those situations, sometimes it's, well, here's my title. It's like, well, I get that. I know the staff or I know the students a little bit better, but if you want to have that, fine. I'm here to help. And if you want to sort of take that lead, that's fine. I'll be supporting you in this various roles. So I think for me, the as I evolved as a leader, I kind of learned when to step in, when not to step in, but you still have to continually be authentic to yourself.
I'll go ahead and jump in real quick here. Um, the question brought me back to would have been maybe like 1997. So I've been in the field for 30 years now. It was my second position at an entry level. So I was an RD. And there was a student that I had, that I've gotten to know and, advised me that he was dealing with a rather significant disease that was, um, likely to cut short his life, right? And so we did a lot to build community around the student. We did a lot to give him space to be able to tell his story to the rest of the residents in the house. And as time passed on, some parts of the story didn't quite line up with each other, right? And so there was a part of me that it was that my instinct kicked in. We like, you know what, this is a rather significant event for this individual, and I want to make sure that this student and their family is receiving support. So I called home and I was like, hey, I just want to let you know that the college is here for you as well. We know that your child is going through something, rather significant, and we want to let you know that we're here for you too. And the parent responded with like confusion. What are you talking about? Um, and I remember that moment of just like, oh God, here we go. We've just exposed this narrative to the rest of the residents. And me in my entry level role, um, there were a couple of things that happened. One, I don't know what it was with the profession at the time, but I felt like it was my responsibility to figure out how to deal with that for in my residential space, and so I did. And what I learned about myself, one is when something feels off, you have to check in with yourself and with someone about, hey, something's not lining up here. But the other thing that I learned quickly is that I could hold space for people while they are experiencing some kind of trauma or grief, um, or pain around an incident. And that kind of capacity to sit with people, and not just with that, but the students who were impacted, but with the actual student who had fabricated this. I was able to hold space with that individual, to advise them like, you're more than just this moment and this incident. And we'll get through this, because I had to hold that individual through that moment as well. And so that capacity to sit in space with people's pain and truths is something early on that I learned that I have. And from that point forward, like if there was a death on our campus, by suicide or by other means, um, independent of what role I was in, I was typically the one that was kind of called upon to be like, hey, can you meet with the parents? Can you guide the parents through, packing up the room? And it's, yeah, again, something that I learned really early on, that there's a capacity and, in some ways, a willingness. I think it's my way of dealing with crisis, is like, let me be involved with the emotions of this, and hold that, with them.
Thank you all for sharing. I was thinking about the example, and I've had a unique experience being able to do student affairs work abroad uh, as associate dean at a campus in South Korea. And um, in that role, this was well, mid-fall. There was the big Itaewon Halloween tragedy that happened in Seoul, Korea. So that impacted our campus. We had to account for our students who were there, just making sure everybody was safe. And then a couple weeks later, or a week or so later, we had a student who um, had completed suicide. Uh, and that was the first time somebody had passed on the satellite campus. So that's when we started learning about protocols in place and trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Um, I've dealt with student death before, so for me, it was trying to get everyone wrapped around this idea of, hey, what needs to happen now? What needs to happen next? Throw in the wrinkle of where this student was not from Korea. The student was not one of our U.S. students, but was from, I believe, Mongolia. So that just added another wrinkle. So now we're having to deal with embassies and all these pieces. That was not my lane in that situation. My lane was to start thinking about the care, thinking about the residents on the floor, um, and start working through some of those processes that we didn't have a playbook for. What I learned about myself and my leadership style, what I learned was that none of my experiences are in vain. So everything that you do in this profession, it may not you may not have to tap into it today, but it may years down the line, you start thinking through, okay, I've dealt with this before. What works, what didn't work? What would I do different the next time if I can control it? And then as far as leadership style, it's just making sure that your competency and your expertise speaks loudly over the emotion. I get it's a very emotional situation, right? But as somebody who's not very emotional in that sense, I had to make sure that I was still giving people space to process the emotion of what happened, but then also just making sure we're through we're establishing new protocols and just making sure we're being caring and attentive in our approach. So I would say my leadership style evolved and empowered me to center everyone around. Okay, there's some steps we need to take right now because the students saw the ambulance, the students saw the gun, the students knew this, this is one of their peers. So what happened with that? You can talk to the Mongolian embassy. You can talk to the corridor. I don't speak the language, so there's some roadblocks there. So I just again was able to lean into what I knew and had the opportunity to trust those previous experiences.
Thank you, panelists. Um, and I think our second question is really gonna follow right up for this first. So this first question that I just asked was really focused on kind of the first time maybe you experienced a crisis through your careers. Many of you all have had many years in this profession, as you all have kind of shared. And so the next question is going to be, can you provide a specific example of a crisis you've managed on a campus? And maybe share a little bit about how you approach or resolve the situation. And then kind of what are some strategies you learned or utilized for managing a crisis effectively?
I'll follow up briefly since I did provide that first crisis at that role abroad. I think for me, the approach is always to remember your training, but then also just utilize your instincts as best as possible, right? So how do we need to secure the space? How do we need to communicate? What do we need to communicate, right? Our trainings are good to give us a foundational piece, but it's just like firefighting. There's some things you can't control, but you still have a responsibility to respond and kind of work through that gray area. My approach is always to remain calm, to make sure that um, we're we're moving forward, not rushing through trying to solve it, but just kind of being that taskmaster and say, okay, how do we take care of this? Who's going to take care of this? Do I need to take care of it? So just establishing role responsibilities as we work through whatever that resolution of that crisis uh, looks like. And I also try to remember that the crisis isn't over then because there's going to be some follow-ups that need to happen. We're going to need to triage the emotions that came with it. There's communications, and forbid it hits the news. So now you have this public piece or it hits the Chronicle and people are talking through the chats or whatever. So it continues on. So how do you manage it, you know, out throughout the whole life cycle of what it can look like?
I can jump in next here. One thing that I've also learned about dealing with crisis is that from the student's perspective, their level of crisis can be different from our level of crisis as a professional. What I've learned is that the students sometimes they can have a range of real sense of danger versus a real sense of discomfort. And when they have some discomfort, they can expedite that into a level of crisis. So with learning, with my expertise in the residence life, as being a resident assistant and resident director, I've seen it a lot at my previous institutions. One institution I was at, a student brought a weapon on campus inside of his room, and it was a firearm, and the student was playing with firearm and did a self-inflicted wound on accident as he was playing with the firearm. So that's real sense of danger, real sense of crisis there. So once the roommate told us, the roommate wasn't shot, wasn't tears. So we immediately, found the information out. We found a safe room to put the roommate in. What I like to always try to do is make sure that I have a room that's not occupied for these events for such nature. So immediately move the resident there, try not to have any trauma effects. Um, had to let the parents, the EMS know immediately, had to divide up the team of what the residents will do versus what the resident directors will do. Also in a crisis, notifying my supervisor at the time what the situation was. So when it come to crisis, you have to realize who needs to be notified immediately. And it's kind of like divide and conquer, based on the nature of the event and trying to assess the situation in a timely manner.
Did you want to jump in, Edwin? I don't know.
Oh, go ahead. I could take the next question.
Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to figure out like, what examples to provide, for folks. Obviously thinking about our kind of institutional response to COVID, and the length of that and how to ensure that we were one of those campuses that stayed open. We brought our students back to campus and tried to do like an island where the students couldn't leave. um, Trying to figure out how to communicate directly and effectively. Small schools tend to, we do a lot of, uh, and I say this in the most caring way, a lot of hand holding, a lot of care, and we provide a lot of grace. During COVID, we had to be clear that grace was was limited. If you thought you could just walk to the corner store, you were going to end up going home and studying remote for the rest of the semester, because of that. And I had to adapt the way that I provided care for students and for my staff. Um, One of the things that I remember, kind of very vividly is I'm having my staff meeting, and they're communicating all of their fears to me, right? And I had to make space for them to tell me how they were feeling about the work that I was asking them to do. Um, and so I paused that meeting because my boss is calling me because he's on a call with the president, right? Again, small schools, layers of operation that are happening with kind of, crisis situations. What I forgot to do was to mute my call with my team while I was talking to my boss, and so they started to hear. And this happens during crisis, right? There are conversations you're having at this table with the president, with other deans, with communications, and then the conversations that you're having with your direct reports, your direct support people, and not there's overlap between those conversations, right? You don't want to be insincere, but you can't completely, you know, take minutes from this meeting with the president and then bring them over to your other meeting and say, okay, these are all the things. There's some highlights there that that I had to figure out, like what information is necessary for my team to have, and vice versa. What is it that they're experiencing on their end that I need to make sure that, yeah, it sounds feasible for the president to say, well, why can't your RD, here they call them house advisors, why can't your house advisors just deliver the meals? um, or so on and so forth, and me having to push back, right, with the president, say, hey, there's some limitations to the work that you're asking us to do. We're gonna have to rethink this part of if we're gonna stay open in this way, we're gonna have to rethink how students are accessing meals. And thankfully, again, that like that kind of push and pull between what our students needed, and the directives there, the kind of grace and support that my team needed, um, there as well. And then the kind of leading up that I needed to do to ensure that as a residential campus, right, 97, 98% of our students live on campus, that I needed to be consulted, when it came to the kinds of expectations that we had for our staff and for our students. So COVID for me was, again, the length of that, for a year. Um, I did realize very quickly that my teams, that my all of them, needed routine debrief sessions with, in this case, we were, fortunate enough to have some funds for an external, like, organizational psychologist to come in and talk to my team, if not once a semester, maybe twice a semester, again, for them to be able to debrief what they were experiencing, from my director of health service and counseling and her teams to the teams in residential life as well. So that was, again, in terms of just thinking about the crisis, the managing up, the managing the fears of not just the students, but my team, and working through the kinds of communications um, that were necessary during that time period.
Yeah, sorry, I lied. I'm going to jump in a little bit, but I think Luis makes a great point about managing up. I mean, when you have presidents and VPs that maybe are decades older than that, I mean, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have our X, we didn't have all these things, and so I think when you talk about how do you efficiently navigate a crisis, back when I was a hall director, it was there wasn't as much of a timeline crunch, right? Now sometimes people are texting each other, group chatting each other as it's happening. And so that I would say that's the only thing that really is the most time sensitive is how is the communication? How do we get that out? Because that is the thing that is going to add to the crisis is misinformation that is sent out there. Now we're dealing with people that are thinking that whatever situation is 10 times worse. Now we're having to navigate that. So I would say, efficiency and crisis, I think sometimes go hand in hand. But a lot of times I'm thinking, okay, care and crisis is not about efficiency, but if you aren't efficient, and especially in communication or managing up, again, that does add to the response that needs to take place. So I think Luis brought some really good points about how do you manage up, and sometimes it's sort of holding your breath and buckling down and hoping that you don't get overruled on no, we're going to do this, despite the fact that you're an expert in your area. So
Thank you, panelists. I'm just reflecting on what you all have shared, and I think it is important, as you all have kind of stated, about the importance, especially of leaders in residence life areas, to create capacity for their staff to share concerns and to find ways to share that information. If you're in a leadership role, to share that with those above you. Because like Edwin said, like there are professionals and leaders from different generations who just have one of the things I learned from the pandemic is there are folks and leaders with just a very different general gen generational understanding of what is going on, how people communicate fears and concerns. And I think that one of the things we learned specifically through the pandemic and beyond is if we don't lift up the needs and the concerns of our staff, they are going to leave and you're not going to have anybody. And we saw that with tons of research about the great exodus in student affairs that happened kind of in the middle and even kind of the years since the pandemic. So I'm really happy that you all brought that up because I think that's so important. And the other thing I also wanted to lift up that I think was embedded in what all of you all said was I think what's really unique about a small college or university is we are all a small and mighty team on our campus and we all wear multiple hats. We don't large universities, when there's a major crisis or something, they may have a position on campus that is devoted to emergency management, right? Oh, what is that one position over there in that office? What are they going to lead? And none of us have that privilege oftentimes. And so I think the importance of relationship building and being collaborative and developing those relationships before a crisis happens is essential because in my belief and in my experience, if your relationships and your camaraderie among your colleagues are strong, when a crisis hits, it'll make it that much more easier to manage and navigate. Next question for you all. And again, everything builds off of each other. How do you recognize and support staff who may be experiencing secondary trauma following a crisis? And I want to amend this question to not just in terms of your support staff, but also yourself, as you all have already shared about crises you have managed. So if you also want to share about how you manage secondary trauma for your support staff or even yourself, I think that would be very helpful to our participants today.
I think the common thread that we've heard is just making space as a as your first thing to do. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be dressed up. Giving people a chance to process aloud, um, I think helps. Not taking anything personal helps when giving that space. So you've had to make some decisions that you may have agreed with, you that may have been directives, right? So, you're the one holding the space for them, so you got to be prepared for it all. Um, I think you also support them by keeping the big picture in focus, but giving grace wherever you can, whether it's deadlines, whether it's, you know, projects and things that you're working on. How do you scale down? Um, and how do you communicate that, hey, I am scaling down because of this, but I just want to make sure this is still on our radars. So that way it's not like, hey, you just had a crisis. Where's your weekly report? What's going on with this? So I think giving grace in that area helps me support staff as well. And I think just asking those follow-up questions um, out of curiosity really helps because you'll get to know more about them and how they're processing by just being a student of who they are. We've had these experiences up to this point. This incident, this crisis happens. So now we need to relearn each other because now we're learning more about each other as a result of what has occurred.
Um, and then I want to add as well, and I just want to be completely honest here with this statement. What helps me to be prepared is that if a crisis has happened, potentially it can happen again. Not, of course, that we don't want it to happen, but it's the sense of being prepared and making sure that working in this field, I always tell myself that there's more residents than us. Okay, there's always a higher number, so potentially that crisis can happen again, or a different type of crisis in that realm of that nature can happen in any given time of day of work, before, during work, after work, weekends, holidays, when the campus is closed, just being prepared, because that crisis or that incident can occur at a time that's unfavorable. So with dealing with myself, just being prepared every day that something can be happening and that I'm not made aware of, that my staff has access to, or like was mentioned before, social media. Theirs is going to be information that's trending about a situation before that we could potentially even know what's going on just because of that. So just making sure that I have my cellular device ready, just making sure that I'm looking at different trends at different colleges slash universities so I can be prepared for if that situation does happen at my current institution. So again, just having that sense of availability and being preparedness, because every day is different. You never know what can happen, and just always being prepared for that event that could happen on your current institution slash campus.
I think reinforcing some of the points that were already made is a lot of times it's easiest to sort of see the staff that are struggling the most and redirect all your energy towards those individuals. But I think as Turner had kind of mentioned, if you have a space where everybody has the opportunity to have that support is vital, because sort of like a car. A car could be functioning great and then all of a sudden it breaks down, right? Versus one that's kind of limping along. You're like, okay, I got to kind of keep an eye on it. You just don't know when somebody has reached that point. And so you kind of have to assume that people um, will continue to be challenged with this. And so how do you ensure that you sort of triage accordingly, so the staff members that seem to be fine and seeming to be navigating things really well, I mean, just pulling them aside saying, wow, you've been on this for 12 straight hours. Like, I need you to take a break. I need you to let's grab some coffee, or get some sleep, do something to kind of ensure that people aren't just we're just not focusing on the ones that tend to be better at sort of emoting that they are maybe in need with that. So,
I'll just quickly add, thinking about again, we had a student who died oh, it's not confirmed, who died on campus. One of our entry-level folks had, performed the wellness check and found the student, right? So, um, thinking about the amount of time that was provided and for my team member to take off time to be able to deal and to work through that particular moment. One of the things we realized was it isn't just right. I mean, they might have taken off about a month. Is that this a year later, same feelings cropped up, right? And so, um, critical incidents on your campus, they are, like they are anniversaries. They will come around the next year, and there still may be an impact on what occurred on that individual, and possibly the rest of your team. One of the things that we did within that year's time, and I think this speaks to what folks have mentioned already, which is this notion of preparedness, which is it meant that like not only did they get QPR training, but now they're like trained to train in QPR. Not only did they get mental health first aid training, but now they are trained to train people on mental health first aid. So we were, I was doing my best, along with my other folks, to provide, especially folks on that front line, if you will, with as much preparation, as possible. Um, Part of it is like knowing full well that as they're going through these trainings, is going to bring up some emotions from things that have happened on our campus, from crises that they've had to experience and deal with. And lastly, I think the one thing that I will share, and this is a much more personal share and a very recent, incident on my end, connected to the campus, is I was swatted, and I don't know if folks know what swatting means. But police get called anyway. If Yeah, if you have a definition, you can look up a definition of swatting. But I was swatted, and it meant that police showed up to my house, assuming that something really horrible had happened and that I was responsible for that. Um, and it was the first time that I've had this kind of incident happen where, a student who I'd been working with crossed the line that we have panic buttons in our offices. I never thought I might need a panic office in my house, right? I never thought that the way that I was engaging with students in crisis might also impact my family. And so it crossed a particular line that, I'm still, if you can imagine, I'm still working through the language and the emotions of it all, for myself. But I realized that I needed to make space for my family to debrief this incident. And not only that, it's also helped me like realize that like, oh, I've been at this work for 30 years and I've never thought that, and I go home and I talk about some of these things. I never thought, oh, I may need to also just more fully process this. This is not about my teams. This is actually about the folks that I go home to and saying, hey, we may need space to bring in someone, maybe to do a reflective circle with us if you're into restorative justice or practices, or calling the stabilization center to say, come on in if you do some post-vention care for families who have experienced some trauma. I just realized that there are ways that my family has probably not kind of the secondary trauma, but some vicarious trauma, in listening to the work that I do take on my campus. And it's just as important for them to process with me how they're feeling about those things.
Thank you so much to you all for sharing that. One of the things that sparked, again, that I think you all spoke about that I wanted to lift up, again, being that this group is about small colleges and universities, is that crises and student deaths hit a little different. I would argue, and I'm biased because I've only worked at small colleges my entire career. They hit more intense. If a student dies at a large university, I'm not saying that's not significant, not important, but I think, a community of 50,000 students, a student death is just different than a student death on a campus of 2,000 students. And I think what you said, Luis, about the memory of year after year after year, that's very, very true. And I know when we had a student death, one of our internal practices at our campus is we don't even use that room for a 4-year period of time, because everybody knows, and those things are lived at year after year after year. So I wanted to lift that up because that is very, very real and something I think those of us that work at small schools really, really have to wrestle with. Um, I'm going to ask one additional question to our panelists, and then we're going to transition into Q&A from our audience. Um, so, how has your understanding of care and support evolved through your experiences with different types of crises and the times that we are living in?
Um, yeah, I think evolved, and maybe you're hitting upon this. Is there in terms of just thinking about large schools or larger schools and small schools? Again, my first position, 1995, was at a small school, and then after that, I would say that they were like mid-sized to large schools. Um, and um, Yeah, there were ways I think at a large school where I felt even though I was part of addressing a crisis, felt very much disconnected from the leadership, or at least and when I say leadership, senior leadership, of the institution. With the exception of maybe my time at NYU when we were dealing with a string of deaths by suicide on the campus, where it became clear that there was kind of a institutional and kind of cultural matter that needed attention, on behalf of our students. Um, but once I got back to a small school and a place like Vassar College, I worked at Skidmore College, um, the ways that the various levels of folks have to work through a crisis is critical. And the alignment that needs to happen there from your student staff to your entry level staff, to your, the kind of that mid level, to the group in your senior group, to, the senior leadership. There needs to be a level of alignment there, and a level of communication and awareness. I was currently just dealing with, again, a smaller level crisis on our campus. Um, One of the things like there are some communications that I can develop and send quickly. Comes in, I could send it back out. And then there are other communications that the lawyer needs to see, that communications needs to see, that the president needs to see before I even send it out. And there's typically a delay then, right, in how we're communicating. And I've learned over time, just like trying to figure out the pacing of that communication is important. The timing of that communication is also important. Um, and I think in terms of my own evolution, I think I've always been an individual that kind of tends to slow down in crisis. So everything about me, my voice lowers, my heart rate lowers, everything about me slows down in those moments. And that's no different than when that first crisis to the things that I'm dealing with now. Um, I think I've been more honest with myself to not just simply work through it anymore. I've been an individual, just even just this latest swatting incident. Like I had 15 students at my house that night. Like that, this is the way that I've kind of conditioned myself to work through crisis. Is like, okay, how do I get myself back to doing some things that I enjoy, and doing some, and that's good. And I needed to take the next day off, right? I needed to be with my family. And that's not something I've always done. I've not always done let me take some time for myself. Let me take some time to breathe. Um, and you know, um, again, much more personal information that folks need to know, like, and talk about COVID. I thought I dealt with that well. And 2021, I had a heart attack, right? There's a way in which stress and crisis impact our bodies. Um, and I didn't need a heart attack to let me know that, but that's what happened. And since then, I've just been much better about like making sure that I'm tuning into my body and the way that it's impacting me in ways that like I didn't do when I was in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s. And now I'm 53. And like I said, learning how to take care of myself has been an evolution.
I had mentioned sort of the speed of communication is sort of the one surprising evolution, but I'd say sort of personally when I was what I would tell my younger professional self is, as a young professional, I thought, well, this will just be easier as I get more experience. Whenever you deal with people in crisis, it's so different. Everything is so different depending upon the crisis and depending upon the people. Some things become a little bit more natural, like who do I need to communicate with? How do I become, how do I engage people, or how do I ensure that our policies and our processes are already in place? And I don't mean this to scare people off, but there should always be a little bit of anxiety sort of in your gut, because I think that that means that you obviously care about a situation, that you are fully invested in people and their success, and really caring about helping them through everything, both yourself and your staff. And so I think for me, like I always thought, well, I'll just become better and it'll just be easier over time. And some things are easier, but when some significant tragedy happens, it still is a tragedy. And so that's the tough thing about it, is I would always remind myself is that you will always feel something. It's just a matter of, how you, again, kind of what Luis was saying, how do you navigate it yourself personally? How do you help your staff navigate it? But it should never be really easy, or else you aren't really caring about it, right? If you're robotic about your response and do this, this, and this, you don't really have feelings for it, then I think especially in the residence life arena, you're probably barking up the wrong tree, and you need to be in a different position where you're not necessarily student facing, or in a position where you're not having to deal with it. But there's always a little bit of pain, but it's just a matter of how quickly you could transition to I guess healing, I would say. So. That sounded really bad. I'm sorry. I don't mean to scare young professionals away, but again, if you care, it will always hurt.
Thank you all. Before we transition to the Q&A, no, Edwin, I appreciate your realness there. And I think when you said that, the first thing is it tends to be why live-in positions are not forever positions, and people are live-in resident directors for 20 to 30 years, because I think it's known, even the scholarship in the field knows that the work is so hard that it just, that kind of work can't be done forever. And it takes a continued toll on folks. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to transition to some questions. Please continue, audience, to submit them. Um, One of the questions I saw was about any good books that individuals want to recommend. I see that Luis has put several of books that I think that they would recommend in the webinar chat. So please feel free to look at those. And um, excuse me, either the audience or panelists, feel free to suggest any other books or materials you have in the chat. Um, I have one question I'd like to read to see if anyone would like to answer it. And so the question is, are student staff RAs the ones that complete wellness checks for your residence halls? How has tragedy such as deaths on campus informed that? I would imagine that different schools kind of do different things, depending upon their structure, their budget, or whatnot. But maybe a panelist, one or two of you can give an example of how wellness checks are processed in your departments.
Our professional staff members handle the wellness checks. Uh, and I think that's best for our campus. When, I start thinking through some of the data on the issues that we have dealt with, and it can be pretty heavy if we've gotten to wellness check points. So yeah, we have our professional staff members conduct those.
I just want to here it's our professional staff as well. We distinguish between wellness checks and welfare checks. Our wellness checks can happen within a maybe 1 to 3 day time period. They're not urgent. And that means that the live-in professional for that house is the person responsible for that. Sometimes they could utilize a student to see like, hey, have you seen this student? What can you tell me? It could be email communication and just wanting to hear back from the students. Or wellness checks are really just kind of like, here, we're hearing some things. Welfare checks are like, we're worried about your concerns for your life. That means that we have our administrator on call, my house advisor, go along with the campus safety officer. So anytime there's a concern around like welfare in that way, campus safety is coming along with us in the event that we have to kind of escalate the calls, and that has been helpful.
I'll add at my campus at Occidental, we don't, we're probably currently probably going to move towards distinguishing welfare from wellness checks. I think what we say as wellness checks are what Luis means as welfare checks on his campus. And one of the things I will just say that I've noticed in probably the last 2 years are parents are even they call our campus saying, I need a wellness check on my child. And it surprised me that parents now know that language and try to use that language. And we really had to build really strong protocols regarding what is and what isn't a wellness check. And we've had to train and retrain our campus safety team, other campus life staff, even faculty on what this is and what this isn't. Because I will say 75% of the requests that like parents have, which is usually the main way we see wellness checks here, they're initiated by the parent or someone off campus. It's usually of the, oh, I've not heard of my daughter in like 2 or 3 hours and I'm worried. Because again, the level of communication and engagement I think this generation has with their parents is much more significant than previous generations. And so we've had to do a lot. For that. And I would imagine that welfare and wellness checks are something that are going to continue to evolve in our work because it's really burning out my live-in staff. Um, so the next question we have is, it's a great one. How do you work through the initial shock phase when you're dealing with a crisis? What has allowed you to be present for others and make sure you're moving forward to resolutions when you're still dealing with disbelief?
Uh, I'll take that one. That's a great question there. And I'm thinking about that moment dealing with a crisis where my previous institution was shut down towards the middle of the semester. Dealing with that because I was a living professional at the time. So a lot of people it affect just their job, but for myself, it was just a job and also my place of living. But trying to also put the needs of the students first. So just realizing that in this profession that we're here to serve the students. We're here to make sure they that they are accommodated well. And at the end of the day, having to realize like now I have to worry about myself and whatnot. So it can be a heavy toll dealing with trying to make sure that at the end of the day that my being is is able to continue to the next day, but then also realizing that there are hundreds of students who's dealing with the same thing as well. So one thing I've always taught that there's always there can be somebody that's in a worse position than yourself. So just realizing that every day, realizing that I need to help make sure that the students is doing well and that the next day that they're going to be able to have the tools and resources that they need. And at the end of the day, also having blocking some time off to realize what I need to do to continue serving the role and to being in the right mental capacity of helping the students that I'm serving in as well.
When I'm dealing with staff on a situation and we're all sort of in disbelief, I think a lot of times as a leader, it obviously, there is a certain level of vulnerability it's helpful, I think, to throw out there. I know I've dealt with situations where somebody in the leadership role will take charge and be completely clueless, but then just but that's, they kind of think, well, this is how we have to do things and I'm in charge. And, versus if you're like, wow, this is kind of a challenge. Like, who's got some ideas? Well, let's think this one through. And if you kind of think about utilizing your entire leadership team, I think I think you are able to come up with better solutions, because a lot of times you as a leader might be fixated on, okay, how am I going to communicate with the president, right? And that's a much different challenge than how are we going to navigate the floor community, right? And so, you know, uh, relying on a hall director or an assistant director that supervises hall directors, they might have better knowledge and just better expertise at that time. Not to say that you haven't, done that yourself, but if you're worried about how do I manage up the president, you might totally skip that. So I think for me, whenever situations happen, I kind of look at it as, where's my team? Let's kind of throw all of our knowledge in the giant pot and then develop something, right? Hopefully we have a standard operating procedure that is well documented, so it's easy to just go back and follow through with that. But a lot of times, even those are so broad that we still need to tweak it a little bit. But I think that helps for everybody to see that the person that is air quote in charge is open to hearing ideas and again stepping up or stepping back as needed. And I think that sometimes helps everybody sort of process that. So so it isn't. I'm not as an entry level professional. I am in shock. But guess what? The director, the AVP, is also in shock. So wow, this is a pretty serious situation. But we're all navigating this together, and we're going to get through this together. So we're not all alone. I'm not an oddball because I'm so shocked about what's going on.
Thank you all. And I'll quickly add before we wrap up. Every crisis is unique, certainly, and hits a little bit differently. But I will say one of the things I learned in my career is I've sadly, I've dealt with more than one student death in my 15-year plus career. And the thing about years of experience is things kind of can get a little bit, you develop a little bit of a muscle memory of like, oh, crap, this crisis has happened before. It hits a little bit differently, but at least I know kind of what to expect because I've maybe had to talk to parents before about this. I've had to work with the floor community, regarding managing this. And so I also think just experience builds capacity to kind of manage crises as you progress through your profession. Pam, thank you all so much today for this important conversation. And a huge thank you to our incredible panelists, Luis, Turner, Edwin, and Alexander, for sharing your experiences, insights, and advice. We're so grateful for your time. On behalf of ACUHO-I and the Small College and University Network, thank you again for being here. We look forward to continuing these conversations with you. Have a great rest of your day and happy holidays.